everyone. This is Sandeep Singh, Assistant Professor, SHM Department of BHM2201. In this video, we are going to discuss about the steps involved in making the breads. Before this, we have a video. In that, we have told you about the ingredient which was used in making the bread. So, this second semester syllabus containing the three units. In the third unit, we need to understand the bakery science. That bakery science include the ingredient which was used in making a bread and their handling, from where we get these ingredients, their handling, and then second topic which we need to cover is the steps involved in making the breads, and the last is the faults or the remedies which occurs while making a bread. So now in this video we are going to discuss about the different types of breads, the steps involved in making of different types of bread. So there are many methods of which breads can be manufactured. However, we can be classified under three broad headings. These includes, we need to understand that there are lots of breads which was produced, but every bread having the ingredients almost the same. Some basic ingredients are same, like flour, water, yeast, sugar, milk and fat. These are some basic ingredients which we need to use for making any types of bread. And for the variation, we do some changes. We do change the ratios of flour, yeast, sugar, water, and the most important thing, the method. The most important part in the bakery or making a bread is the method which we have used for making a bread. That will lead to the different product after the baking. So here we classify the three basic method which was used in making a bread. Then we have a common steps need to be follow making a bread. So for making a dough, so first we need to understand what are the three different method which we use, then their common steps of making the breads. So here comes the first straight dough method, then we have ferment or a sponge and a dough, then we have continuous dough method. So first we understand what is straight dough method. Now we read what is the straight dough method. This is the one of the most popular method of manufacturing of bread and is a simple and a straightforward. Fermentation times can be varied from 30 minutes to 14 hours. This is varied by altering the quantity of yeast, salt and water. Types of flour will affect the time of fermentation. A very strong flour, gluten flour, will require a longer time of fermentation and to help in the softening the mellowing of the gluten. So will a high maltose flour, however a whole wheat bread or a germ bread will require a shorter fermentation time due to the high enzyme activities in the germs of the water grains and the higher water content in the dough. The shortest method is this no time dough method, which call for a high percentage of yeast, 2.5 percentage, and the dough is directly mold scaled. This is not a very good method of bread making and must be restored only in dry circumstances. The method is not very efficient as there is no time enough for the gluten to ripen or the mellow down the breads and can be said to gas rather than ferment. This finished product is generally not of very good quality and the bread stales quickly because of the insufficient gluten ripen. The bread structures also will show uneven expansion as the gas is not evenly distributed in the gluten networks. The bread which lack the characteristic aroma of the well fermented dough. Germ breads, there is not enough time for the various chemical changes to take place. Germ breads are made with this method or a 30-minute fermentation dough. Due to the enzymatic activities that cause the dough to ripen quickly, the dough is made warm, preferably to help develop the flavors of the dough quickly. The most common use is straight dough method. Process for 1 to 5 hours of bulk fermentation. This is the time from the dough made to the scaling to the dough. Of this, 3 to 4 hours are most widely used for processing. So in the first method we have the straight dough method. We will understand what is the straight dough method. So here we will understand what is straight dough method. Straight dough method is a method in which is very popular and common and traditional way of working. What they do in a straight dough method, they do nothing. They mix all the important ingredients together and they give time for the fermentation of a dough. That time depend upon the quality of flour and the amount of yeast and the water we have used, and this will lead to the time consumed by the fermentation process. The time of fermentation can be from 30 minutes to more than 5 to 10 hours or up to 12 hours depending upon the quality of flour. If we have used the hard flour, their gluten is hard, so it will take a lot of time. And if we have used the less yeast or less sugar, so this or less moisture content, this will leads a lot of time, so that the protein present in the dough, that is gluten, get repens and are able to make a firm structure, so that the yeast worked or released the CO2 that can be trapped easily. So this is a very good method, but this method helps in wrapping all the structure of protein, and that will lead to the formation of a very good dough, that after the baking the bread structure, aroma, taste will be good, and the bread cannot be get fungus or get spoiled very quickly, because the each and every part of the gluten is wrapped very well, and all the things have baked properly during the time. During this we have one under this category straight dough method, we have no time dough method is also there, but this no time dough method is only used when there is a very disastrous circumstances is arrived, that we need to get bread very quickly. So in that, what we do, we take a good quantity of yeast, which is about 2.5% more than the normal quantity of yeast which we use for a normal dough. We put 2.5% of more of the yeast in that, and that yeast activated very quickly, and they start doing the fermentation process very fast. We provide a good temperature, good food or good sugar content to the yeast, start its working. But during this, the one disadvantage is that the protein strands which was there, which get mixed with the milk and the malt present and the fat present, still they don't get that enough time to make the proper strands, and this will lead to the formation of bread which cannot be good and get easily spoiled after the manufacturing, because their moisture content is not properly taken out. Their the protein which was present in that is not easily digested or not get into that form that can be baked, and after that it will be easily digestible by the body. So this is not a very suitable method used by us. So the straight dough method having a subcategory of method, that is no time dough method, but the straight dough method is a method which was generally used depending upon the quality and the quality of flour and the amount of yeast and sugar and other ingredient which we used, and the final product which we want to use. This chart is showing that how much amount of yeast we need and what temperature, what salt content we need to get a perfect dough with the time which we require for the fermentation also. So depending upon the structure of flour, yeast, water which we use, we get a perfect dough according to our requirement. Then we have coming with the ferment or sponge and dough process. Breads and buns can be made in two stages to help fasten the fermentation and yet achieve better dough wrapping. These are ferment and dough process, sponge and dough process. So in this we have two. Basically, the ferment is the second method which we used, and this having two subcategories of dough making. One is sponge dough and one is ferment dough process. So we start with this ferment and dough process. A ferment is a portion of water, yeast, food and flour just enough top, make a thin batter. The yeast readily disposes in the water and begins assimilating the food dissolved in the water. It becomes fermenting immediately and multiplies and is soon active and vigorous. This make it in a first class condition to undertake the hard work of fermenting the dough. A ferment is made and kept until it shows a sign of collapse. This is when it is considered to be and it is optimum for the bread fermentation. This is however not necessary, as the ferment might be ready in advance. Usually 30 minutes to 1 hour is sufficient for achieving the good result. A ferment is usually used when the dough to be made is rich and has a high sugar concentration. Usually the ideal concentration for yeast to work at 10% sugar. Thus, a ferment made with this concentration will give the bread a boost when the concentration is bound to increase the final dough going up to 30% in the buns. The flying ferment has a hard gas of water, yeast, sugar and flour, which is allowed to stand only till the rest of the ingredients are weighed and the dough is prepared, approximately 10 to 20 minutes. So we will discuss this, what is ferment and dough process, sponge and dough process. Ferment and dough process is a process in which what we do, we make the fermentation separated in different containers and the dough is made in a different containers. This is also known as fly ferment process. What they do, they take the quantity of yeast which we need to be used in the coming mixture of the dough and the food which was required by the dough, that is sugar, and the liquid which was required by the final dough. What they do, they take they measure all the ingredients according to the recipe, according to the quantity of dough which we required to get it, and some part of the thing like yeast, the full part of yeast, full part of sugar, some part of flour, some part of water content, some part of milk content, some part of fat content is mixed together in a different sub container where the yeast start working and get the maximum multiplication in that particular and produce the full of its CO2 whatever they want, and this particular batter is then mixed with the final dough which we need, and we knead it properly. What happens, this fermented dough which mixed fermented batter when mixed with the final dough, this gives fast ripening of this structure of gluten, and that what it leads to, the making of dough easier and quicker. Within 40 or 45 minutes of time they get properly proper dough in which the protein strand are cooked very much means ripen very well. So during the baking they get a fine texture and fine aroma in that, and all the things in that are very good. This process is also known as a flying fermentation because the fermentation was done in a different way and then it is added and the final product is made. The dough which was made in which this batter is mixed is also needed with some amount of yeast of the final quantity which we required, some quantity of flour, some quantity of sugar and some quantity of flour. Maximum of flour, minimum of yeast and minimum of sugar and minimum of water content. So they also start ripening and breaking down the different sugar starch present in the dough content to make the CO2, and they decomposes the sugar content into the simpler form of sugar content, and the proteins which was present, that is gluten start making the strands, and the gliadin may start making the elasticity property developing. But when this batter mixed with this, they give a perfect dough structure within no time or within a shorter time of fermentation process. Now coming with the sponge method, sponge and ferment method. A sponge can be said to be a stiffer version of the ferment. The rate of fermentation is hence lesser and the sponge is kept for a longer time. It is made by mixing a part of flour, yeast, sugar and salt, sometimes not, and some or all the water. The speed of the fermentation is controlled by the amount of yeast added, additional of salt, water content and the temperature of both the sponge as well as the holding temperature. When the sponge has dropped, the remaining materials are added to make a dough, which is then given a bulk fermentation. The size of the sponge is related to a dough will give the name to the process. A sponge, 1/3 sponge, 1/2 sponge. The sponge quantity will go only up to 75% of the dough content. The main purpose of the sponge is to help develop the marrow flavor, which is the result of the long fermentation. This is done without subjecting all the gluten to the harsh fermentation process and thus staggering the quality of gluten present in the final product. This prevents a weak structure or a collapse of the bread. Most bakeries, a portion of the previous day's dough is added to achieve this effect. The dough thus ripen well at walk-in temperatures 5 to 7 degrees Celsius. The sponge dough method. The sponge dough method is a method in which what they do, they take. It is different from the first one process, ferment and dough process. In a sponge and dough process, what they do, they make a sponge which is a much better texture than the better one, a bit firm and bit hard. In that, what they do, they use the 75% of refined flour, yeast, sugar, water, milk and fat content, and they make a sponge, and that sponge was kept aside so that the fermentation process will go, and the rest 25% of thing was needed separately, just like in dough, or just like a bit harder than the dough. And after that, this was added to the dough to give a final soft, semi-soft structure so that the bread cannot be composed. What happens when this fermentation process takes place? The whole maximum 75% of the those gluten and those sucrose and glucose and dextrose was composed by the yeast easily and produces the CO2, and the gluten structure already makes the strands. But this dough, the dough which was having 25% of the quantity of each and everything, when it mixed, they give a firm structure to the dough that will lead to the proper baking of bread, and the bread cannot be the breads cannot be fall or collapsed while baking. As we have discussed in the history, that there is a process what they do. They used to keep a fermented dough or a dough needed overnight, and the fermentation occurs, and they use that dough to the next batch so that they get the perfect fermentation process. Same here, this process is here the process is follow. So we have discussed the two method, straight dough method and ferment dough method. In the straight dough method, we have one no time dough, and no time dough is what different from the straight dough method. The no time dough is a dough in which we put 2.5% extra of the yeast to the normal recipe. Then we come with the ferment and dough method. In the ferment and dough method, we have two quality of ferment and dough method. One is ferment and dough method, and second one is sponge and dough method. The ferment and dough method is also doing a fly ferment process. What they do in that, they use 75% of the ingredients mixed together, and they make a batter of that, and 25% of the ingredients they are used as a solid form, and they mix it very well, and they do it. This is ferment and sponge method. And the ferment and dough method, what they do, they make a dough of 75% and rest 25% are mixed together, and they kept it, and they mix it very well. Within a 20 or 30 minutes of time, they get the fermented easily. Both the process having their advantages and disadvantage, but both the processes used for to get the fermentation process very much easier. And this process again depends upon the type of flour or dough which we are going to use. The next is coming with salt delay method. This is the third and the final steps or a style of making a dough. that salt delay bread making process, an excellent process used initially for harsh gluten flours but now widely used for all bread making process, at is drastically reduce the fermentation time without giving any change in the quality. The process called for the omission of salt in the first stage of the dough making. As was discussed earlier, salt is help in controlling the pace of fermentation by the yeast, and hence when the salt is omitted in the first stage, the action of the yeast will increase, the gluten will ripen or soft, well, due to the rapid actions of the gases released, the chemical change that take place in the dough will also fasten, and the effect of the acid produced will be visible in the shorter time. The salt is added later on in the three ways. Salt delay process or salt delay bread making process is a process in which what they do, they put the salt after making a dough, fermented dough. What happens in this, and this process is generally used by the commercial outfit nowadays by each and everyone. What happens, and what was the benefit of this is, what they do, they generally mix all the ingredient, all the yeast, all the water content, whatever required for the dough except the salt. They put each and everything, because as we all know that the salt is a thing which controls the fermentation process, which controls the functioning of yeast. So with the help of salt, they try to control the functioning of yeast. So what they do, they when they in the very first stage, what they do, they mix all the ingredients. The yeast start their functioning very well. The glutens get ripen very well due to the good production of CO2, as the yeast was not controlled by any controlling agents present in that. So they reach to the maximum flexibility and the maximum elasticity and the maximum fermentation required by the dough. After that, we put the salt to control the functioning of yeast. And how we are going to add the salt, and there are the different stages where we can put the salt. There are basically three stages where we can put the salt and control the further functioning of the dough. The first one is by sprinkling the salt over the dough. The first process is by only sprinkling the salt over the dough and keeping it aside, so that the salt will dissolve with the get absorbed in the dough and start controlling or start doing its function. It gives a good crispy and salted flavor and texture to the dough. Then by using some water reserved for the original quantity. From the original recipe, we kept some water. In that water we dissolve the salt in that, and then we mix the dough with that. So this is the way. And the third, by using some fat to incorporate the salt. The process is the best method of conditioning a dough without using higher yeast content or an increasing in fermentation temperature or a time. In the above two method, we need to kept it for some time, but in incorporated with the salt, what they do, there is a no need of giving particular time. The fat get easily mixed up with the salt, and when they baked, they start controlling the yeast functioning. So this is the three different ways of making in the doughs. Now we are going to see the common steps used by making any of the dough. What are the basic common steps of making the dough? In the above slides which we are moving, you can see the making of sourdough. Sourdough are very much popular, are the dough which are naturally fermented and kept so that the sourness flavor is developed, and they are very digestible, very easily digestible, as their protein and the glutens which was present are get easily very soft in the nature while baking, and they are very good for health, because your stomach does not need any extra efforts to get the digest. So this is what the sourdough recipe, and these are the some recipes of other things. But before that, we need to understand the common steps required. The common steps which were required, there are near about 14 to 15 steps which are you can say the 14 basic steps which are required to get the bread done easily. So just a minute, we will see. These are the equipments which we used in making a bread. We will also discuss this, basically what they are. Before that, we need to understand what are the 14 steps which were involved in making of bread. So here we are telling about the different ovens which will we discuss also. Then the other equipments, which was also used in bread making. We must know about the different equipments, because we need various equipments in making a dough on a commercial level. So we will read it out this what we need. First, before that, we need to understand the different steps involved in making a dough. This is what about the okay. So here we come with the different uh, different different steps involved in making a bread. So there is a 12 steps, basic steps involved in making the bread. Before that, we have understand there is a three different ways of making a dough. The straight dough method, that having one category, no time dough. Straight dough method is a method in which we knead the dough and keep it for fermentation for process. And the fermentation process depend upon the quality of flour and the yeast and the sugar is used and what type of bread we need. So it can be up to 10 to 12 hours, from 1 hour to 10 to 12 hours. Then no time dough is a dough in which we use maximum of yeast. Generally we use 2 point near about 2.5% more quantity of yeast to get the no time dough. But these doughs are not very good because they can collapse early, and the product, after baking the product can be spoiled within a few hours, because the ripening of the protein strands are not done properly. Then we have the ferment and ferment and dough method. In this we have two category. One is ferment and dough method, then we have ferment and sponge method, and then we have the last is salt delay method, in which we don't put the salt during the first stage of the making a dough. Then we have the when we put the salt in the three ways, either on the sprinkling, either with the help of water, or either then we do it with the help of fat content. So these are the three basic types of dough which we use for making different types of bread items like focaccia, baguettes, buns, fruit buns, etc. Now the common 12 steps are there which was used in making all the dough. After that we will decide what type of dough we need to make, and we decide the method of making the dough. So the common baking process or the common steps include 12 steps. The steps are follows. First is scaling ingredients, second is mixing, third is fermentation, fourth is bunching, fifth is scaling, sixth is rounding, seventh is benching, eighth making up and panning, ninth proofing, 10th baking, 11th cooling, and 12th storing. So these are the different 12 steps which we need to follow. So here comes the first steps we need to describe, that is scaling ingredient. Here we will weight each and every ingredient whatever we are going to use, either it's water, either it's salt, either it's sugar, either it's flour, either it's all the major ingredient whichever is required according to the recipe. We measure it to the perfection, because anything goes up and down will directly affect the final product of the uh, bread or the dough. So scaling is very much important. Then we have mixing. Mixing of dough means we mix the dough, we mix the all ingredient whatever available according to the requirement, how we are going to use the different methods of making dough or sponge. So we mix the things according to that. Mixing yeast dough has three main purposes: to combine all the ingredients to a uniform and smooth dough, to distribute the yeast evenly through the dough, to develop the gluten. This mixing is done for a reason that after doing the proper mixing, either we will get a uniform smooth dough, we will get yeast properly mixed throughout the dough, and the gluten can develop easily. Then we have a fermentation process. Here is the stage where as we all discuss, yeast start working, it gets its food and it start multiplying and start digesting the starch content present, carbohydrate and starch present in the dough, and they convert it into the acid and the CO2, and the CO2 released and trapped in the protein strands of the wheat, which lead to the fermentation and proofing of the dough. Then we have punching. This is a stage where what we do after the first fermentation process, we punch the dough, or we put make a pores in the dough, so that the excess CO2 which was developed due to some issues of the yeast or their processing, and the excess amount of yeast the excess amount of CO2 which we does not require, they come out. So this punching stage is done. Then we have a scaling stage. A scaling stage is a stage we need to know what gram of final product we need. We do the scaling, we cut out the portion of dough for our final products, we weight it, and after the baking we know it how much quantity it is going to be, or after baking how much lighter quantity will be come up, the lighter weight will be come up. So we do the scaling so that the uniformity of the batch or uniformity of the weight is maintained. After the scaling, actually what happens that the dough which we do scale, after the baking there is a loss of near about 10 to 13% of loss of water content or moisture content, due to which the weight will be uh, lighter, or that's why we need to do the scaling properly. Actually after this weight loss will be appear, because there is a loss of 10 to 13% of water content or moisture content, so there is the loss of weight. So that's why the final product, if we need a bun of 55 grams, so we need to cut it to the near about 60 grams, so that after the loss of 10 to 13% it will come to the 55 grams. Then we have a rounding. After scaling, the piece of dough are shaped into a smooth and round ball. The process forms a kind of a skin by stretching the gluten on the outside of the dough into a smooth layer. Rounding simplify the later shapes of the dough and also help retaining gas process by the yeast. Rounding is a process after the cutting the scaling the dough, we round the dough balls, and the dough balls basically after making the round balls, and what happens, they get a rest, and this resting will help the making of protein which was present in the dough, making structure for them, so that they can easily be holded, and the gas which was inside the CO2 will be holded in this. Then we have process of benching. Process of benching is just a stage of giving a rest to the dough, so that the portioned bowls of the dough can get a proper rest, and gluten develops, and the CO2 which was released can easily be trapped, glutens work it properly. So this benching is basically the resting. Then we have makeup and panning. Makeup and panning is means we are going to put the doughs into the pan where we want to bake the rounded dough and get the desired shape. The panning is what we do some oiling in that, because when we going to bake it, if it is not oiled, then the crust will become stick, crust will stick with the mold, and it is quite impossible for that to get the final product out easily. What we do, we put a butter paper, and the butter paper was bit moistured or oiled or seasoned, so that the sponge, when it's cooked, or the dough which is cooked, they can easily come out from the dough. This is making and panning. Then we do it proofing. After this, again we give, after this we again we put the this panning of the dough, means the dough which was put in a particular shape of molds, they are put it into the proofing chamber. There are lots of proofing chamber. They provide a suitable temperature and suitable heating and moisture temperature to the yeast, so that they can do their last stage of working. Whatever proofing or whatever fermentation they can do in this stage, they can do, and the bakers can get the desired shape whatever they want. So they do the proofing. After the proofing, they will do the baking here done in the oven, and with the help of some moisture content, so that dryness does not come. And the baking is done is around near about 140 degree Fahrenheit to above that. It start from 60 degrees Celsius to up to the requirement of the baked product. This baking is done. After that, when the product is baked for 10 to 12 minutes, generally in 10 to 12 or 14 minutes, the product is ready. After the baking, we take out the bread and let it cool for some time, so that after the cooling, it is easier for the person to take out the bread easily. After baking, bread must be removed from pan and cooled, and alcohol created during the fermentation, small rolls tears on out and baked on a sheet may be left on them, because they have got adequate air circulation. If soft crusts are desired, breads are may be brushed. So this is what cooling is done. After the cooling, we do the storing. Breads are kept and packed aside for 8 to 10 hours, and this is then stored properly. The breads are stored properly. So this is all about the basic 12 steps which were involved in making the bread. And after that, we make a decision of, this is the common steps which you involve here. After mixing the ingredient, we decide what type of method we are going to make a dough, that is straight dough, a straight method dough, or ferment and sponge dough, and the salt delay method. So this is all from this video. We finished out with this video.